Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call us to order. We do not have a quorum present, but once we do, we'll allow the members who are online to participate officially. Our action items today are only minutes and the acceptance of the profit and loss, the financials. So if it wouldn't be action on those today, but to keep us on schedule and moving. Just like to welcome everyone. It's been a while since we've seen everybody in person. Sometimes I forget who you are because I haven't seen you in person. I'm like, who's that guy? Appreciate having everybody here. So the first item is public comment. Do we have anyone in the room who would like to give public comment today? Do we have anyone online for public comment? I saw Sean. I didn't see a whole lot of folks. Oh, there's Margaret. I see some community members jumping on. Great. All right, we'll move past public comment. And I want to, so our consent agenda is the action item, but until we have, for those who just joined online, until we have a physical quorum present, we'll be unable to take action on that. However, just to prep for it, presuming we will get quorum, will there be any additions or edits to the minutes that anybody has? We'll be all set for that. And we'll hold on. Were there any presentation points on the other item on consent today? So it just was a matter. No. Awesome. Well, today I am very happy to introduce what will be the body of our regional meeting this time around. We were thrilled to have Delegate Hudson with us today. And this was, the executive committee started talking probably over a year ago about having some interaction with our state legislators relative to the work we're doing at the partnership, but we didn't think it would be similar to how the localities actually sit down, work on a legislative packet, and then present that to the legislators. We don't really felt that was the way it was going to go. So this is kind of the first kind of jump off into having some engagement with the folks that are representing us at the state level. And hopefully will be the kickoff to other interactions with some of our other state electeds. Sally was the first woman to serve Charlottesville and was elected in 2019. She assumed office in January of 20, and her current term will end January 10th, 2024. Now, I have to work at this because you put a new word in here for me to use. But Sally is a labor economist and an applied econometrician. I had to look that word up. Yeah. I'm thrilled you're an econometrician after I read the definition, by the way. And teaches the statistics sequence at the Baptist School, including courses in randomized evaluation and causal inference, which caused casual interference in my brain. Sally earned her PhD in economics from MIT. She has a BA in economics from Stanford, so that says that she knows what the hell she's talking about. And as a freshman legislator in 2020, Delegate Hudson successfully carried legislation to authorize the use of ranked choice voting in Virginia's local elections, which, if you've been paying attention to some of the local folks, at least in Albemarle, we had a wonderful presentation on ranked choice voting and what it just, down to the basics of what it is, what does it mean to have that just recently in November. So very thrilled to have you here today, Delegate Hudson. We appreciate having your time to talk about regional housing, affordable housing, and what that means at the state level. We're going to give, obviously, folks a chance. It's going to be kind of an open, casual back and forth today from the members. And Ian, hopefully, you'll help me police anybody online as questions come up. And just as a way to start off, I would we'll have Delegate Hudson make any opening remarks that she would like. And the first question I'll just throw out there was, what legislative priorities, if any, do you have that impact affordable housing that you're looking to this term? Delegate Hudson.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for allowing me to drop in. And if we haven't had a chance to meet before in person, I hope you'll stick around and we can start to do that. I've had a chance to work with some of you very closely and some of you not at all, and I've had some of you in class, so if you have any trouble with Ian's math skills, you know who to blame. I so appreciate the opportunity to start to build a stronger bridge between these groups and the legislature, because I think we all know that affordable housing is priority 1, 2, and 3 for the constituents that we collectively serve, and it's going to take a lot of collaboration between state and local government in particular, because the General Assembly is often handcuffing you all from doing the kind of things that you need and denying you both the resources and the flexibility to try to tackle the problem with the full suite of tools that you deserve. For that reason, my legislative priorities around affordable housing have always bubbled up on the local level, because I think that those of you who are working on actually trying to implement it at a block by block level know the most about what you need for our localities. In 2020, for example, that started with carrying legislation to authorize Charlottesville to have its own flexibility for inclusionary zoning, at the same time that there were other legislators who were carrying a statewide plan. We worked really hard to get Charlottesville and now Mall to have the full flexibility to do something different, because this little 10 square mile town has slightly different needs than a lot of other spots. In 2021, especially during COVID, the affordable housing priorities for me meant eviction protections, because I think, as you all know, at least in the recent future, Virginia had 5 of the top 10 highest cities for eviction rates, and so that was my 2021 priority around affordable housing. Going into the next session, I am planning to introduce 3 bills, 2 of which were direct requests from local folks, one of which came as a priority from the Board of Supervisors, which is about allowing short-term rentals to expire if the property changes hands, because I think we're getting increasingly concerned about companies gobbling up lots of different properties that were perhaps potentially originally intended for owner-occupied housing to have maybe another stream of income on their property, but are increasingly becoming consolidated in the hands of larger firms and really dramatically reshaping the character of some of these units in especially more rural parts of Albemarle, as Albemarle continues to be a vacation destination and part-time, part-year rentals for a lot of people. That's one of them. Another one came at the request of individual members of the City Planning Commission to explore allowing property and units to be, structures to be taxed at different rates, potentially allowing for some more flexibility when we know we've got some underutilized opportunities for urban infill in the city, which could potentially be prime places to put more affordable housing. And then the third, which is a project that it was not a direct request from local folks, but I think has some value statewide, which is an interesting collaboration on accessory dwelling units. Trying to set some minimum standards for ADU ordinances statewide, because there are some localities that still have not exercised that authority, or some that have done so in such a restrictive way that they're not really a viable option, and they're leaving potential units off the market. That's been an interesting collaboration, because it includes some of the very free market housing folks up in the urban parts of Nova who are George Mason affiliates. It includes the AARP, because these are really attractive units for a lot of people who want to age in place on their original property, but for whom the old house with the stairs and more room than they can have is not really a viable option. And then also includes some legislative colleagues of mine in Southwest Virginia, which are in some of the spots that are facing the biggest problem taking advantage of these. So those are the 3 bills that I personally am trying to spearhead around affordable housing. More generally, I think there is a lot of work to be done in our current political environment to remind everyone, as we discuss affordable housing in the upcoming session, because it is a priority of the administration, that there are important legal changes to be made, and also it must come with funding. That I think that the current administration is sort of trying to hit demand side subsidies and supply side constraints against each other, when really it's a yes and answer. There are some units that will need to be permanently subsidized for tenants, for owners, that we know will not be able to maintain the income stream that they need to stay in place, whether that's people who are permanently disabled, elderly people on fixed incomes. I know these are all familiar to you, but I think it's very important that we not think of those as competing objectives, but really as collaboration in the broader portfolio. Those are the proactive things that I think we can do on affordable housing. Candidly, I also think we're gonna have to play some defense on some proposals that make me nervous. When I hear this administration talk about wanting to fast track the construction of affordable housing, I think some of that involves what you all know to be politically tricky promises about trying to expedite permitting and ease zoning restrictions. I am concerned that the administration also means cutting corners on labor and environmental regulations and allowing projects to go up faster because they're shortchanging either workers or the environment. And so I think it's very important that as we talk about affordable housing construction, that we remain vigilant to make sure that the people who are building those homes are being fairly compensated. We know that the construction industry historically in Virginia has been one of the industries with more rampant wage theft, especially because a lot of the workers are immigrants, which makes them especially vulnerable to labor rights violations. And then, none of this construction can come at the expense of basic environmental safety protections around runoff and waterways and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's important that we all move with deliberate speed toward investing in affordable housing, but not while cutting corners on things that matter for the health and safety of both residents and workers.
Thank you, so I think what we'll do is I'll just open this up and by show of hand, and if you're online, you can just hit the old raise hand button on Zoom, and then we'll just go through. We have plenty of time to get some questions in, and I have some backups just in case we're feeling a little shy. And once you ask your question, if you could just introduce yourself and your organization that you represent, so Delegate Hudson knows exactly where you're coming from. So I'll open up to the board. Who would like to ask some questions today? Yes, Mayor Snow.
Sally, I'm curious about, has the Youngkin administration given any details on what they think they're talking about? Because at one level, what they're talking about, I think, oh, good. On the other hand, I'm leery. Any details at all out there yet?
It's still pretty thin. They put out in the last week or two since Thanksgiving an updated version of the Virginia housing plan, but it's still pretty thin. I think that we will see when bills actually start to drop in the next 6 weeks what exactly we're talking about. I will say in the 6 months or so since the first budget briefing where the administration started talking about affordable housing, they have softened their tone a little bit on subsidies and recognize that there is a role for vouchers, both project-specific vouchers and tenant-side vouchers. So they used to be warming up to that. But I think particularly when it comes to the most politically contentious ones, like zoning and permitting, that is still a lot TBD. I think the detail that has emerged that I think is most concerning probably to local officials is proposals to potentially shorten the period for review and say, you can't set your own timeline for reviewing projects. It has to, occur within 12 months or 6 months or whatever. But again, still a bullet point, not a bill.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I'll jump in. And we really do appreciate you coming today. Yeah. You mentioned ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And I have to frame this because I'm not speaking for the entire board of supervisors, right? I'm speaking from my world in the urban ring in the university town. And my concern is when we are talking about accessory dwelling units in older neighborhoods in university towns, what happens in at least in my experience is they fill up with graduate students and UVA students, which number one doesn't solve the problem of affordable housing. And it creates situations in neighborhoods because those students don't have the lifestyle we'll say, that the neighbors in many of those older neighborhoods have, or seek to have, right? So I guess the devil's always in the details. I am definitely in favor of affordable dwelling units. We have many neighborhoods that are built to accommodate affordable dwelling units, right? If you think about sort of the model of Belvedere and those models. But I would ask that you give some thought to how we might function in a community like ours, where we have 25,000 students. And many of my apartment complexes in my district are graduate students and UVA students. That's fine. And so lots of parents coming in and buying houses in the neighborhoods for their son or daughter to live in. So we then have multiple houses being inhabited with multiple folks. That's fine. But now if we start talking about adding ADUs in backyards in my older neighborhoods that are then also filling up with students, that's a concern.
I would love to send you a draft of the bill, and we just got something from the Division of Legislative Services, so it's not bullet points, it is a bill.
Right.
And would love feedback from you. I mean, I do think at a certain level, it's a property rights issue, which is I do think people have rights
I
to
agree
build
with
on
that.
their own property. And I do think we also have to be a little bit careful about the idea that neighborhood character is often used as a concern for why we can't have more construction. And so if we think about, if we see specifics in the bill that you think are especially worrisome, I would love to drill down on those.
Because I'd love to have something, and I'm not opposed to ADUs, I just want to think them through carefully, because often we have bills that create unintended consequences. Right. And we don't have very many older neighborhoods that have affordable housing, right? And so I don't want to necessarily have unintended consequences without solving the problem.
Sure thing.
And maybe it's something we could work with the University of Virginia on. I have no idea how, but the devil's always in the detail.
Wonderful. I would make sure we get a draft here so we can talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Very good. Other questions?
Hey, I'm Anthony. I'm with Blue Ridge Area Coalition for the Homeless. We're a COC lead agency, if that means anything to you. But basically, we're tasked with leading collaborative efforts on homelessness locally. And it's a little bit of a statement and a question, I guess. But I just want to let you know that the large amount of funding that came through the Department of Housing and Community Development was just instrumental in our ability to safely shelter and also help people move from homelessness into housing. And it was, it was a lot, it was a huge injection. A lot of it was federal funding, but it was done largely, I think, in the right way. I just wanted you to know that. It was, I think, administered well from the DHC's perspective. It's helped us really transform how we do homeless services. From the beginning of this year, the rate of people moving into their own rental as opposed to moving in with friends or family was 65% of people who left our homeless system for housing left actually for their own rental, which in previous to the pandemic was closer to 50% or less. So having access to rental assistance has been huge. And so I wanted to give some support for your efforts to bolster that at the state level, because it's an instrumental part of solving homelessness. Of course, our bottleneck is with the units right now.
Right.
We have to have access to a lot of rental assistance and not the units. So, but I guess a question, just looking to the future, there's been a lot of injection of funding that's COVID related, a lot of kind of questions about what the future holds moving forward in terms of the state's approach to rental assistance or homeless assistance in particular. I didn't know if you had any thoughts or ideas on that. If I can ever be of help in that realm, please let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's wonderful to hear you say that from your firsthand experience of working with the organization, because I had seen some of the more distant reports, and it's always great to hear things validated firsthand. I would love to talk with you about what we can do to trumpet that success story, particularly if you have sister cities around the Commonwealth that have had a similar experience or not, or whether Charlottesville is sort of a beacon on the hill in this case. But I do think that the massive amount of federal funding that came down from COVID allowed a lot of communities across the country to pilot cool things, like Richmond ending and Charles, a lot more for ending bus transit fares for a while, and now having evidence about how that works. I think what we should do is seize every opportunity to now publicize that good work, because I think we do know that this is one of those money invested up front saves a lot of money over the long haul. And so it's really great to hear that the rapid rehousing work here has been a relative success story, and maybe we can think about ways that we can continue to elevate that in Richmond.
Great. Yeah, it's been successful. Would it be even much more successful if there were units, basically? That's part of that story. So.
I was recently at, and maybe some folks here were there as well. Gosh, where were we? It was, it was a similar group as this, and where were we meeting? Oh, it was at the county office building, recently at, I forget what the official name of the convening was, but it was basically everybody in the behavioral health, criminal justice planning, adjacent spaces. And I was part of a focus group that was explicitly about the housing dimensions of this. And one of the action items that came out of that conversation, because they were having the same problem, right? So you've got folks that are being released from ACRJ, may not qualify for units, and I think one of the action items that came out of that was an inventory of the existing units that fit different needs for different clients, and then also potential properties for acquisition that could meet similar needs. So I think there are good folks who are starting to lay the groundwork for that. I'm sure you're part of that one.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Hold on just a second. I want to do an audio check. Are everybody online okay hearing us? Looks like we're good. Okay, good. The two Al's are here to hear it. We do have a hand raised online, so we'll go there first, and then we'll work on you, Sunshine. Yes, go ahead with your question. Hello.
Hi, this is Joy Johnson. Hi, Sally. How are you? I was wondering, do anyone know whether or not if the state were gonna fund vouchers, would it be a dedicated funding for line item? Because even on the federal level, every year we have to lobby Congress to continue to fund the federal vouchers. And so I was wondering about that, if anybody could answer that question, or if that's something that you all have thought about.
You're asking the right question. It needs to become a consistent part of the state budget. I'm afraid that that's not going to be a priority for this administration, given what we're still hearing from the governor about tax cuts. And so I don't know how he can both elevate affordable housing as a priority and then argue that continued tax cuts, particularly on the corporate and investment income side, should come first. And I think part of our job during session is to try to hold those two facts up against each other, and recognize that you can't do both. But I'll ask that question in as many rooms as I can for you.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Sunshine?
Sunshine Mathon, Piedmont Housing Alliance. Hi, Sally. So I actually want to build on Ms. Joy's, Ms. Joy's comment, which is, as you probably know, there was legislation passed last year to create a state housing voucher program, but it was not funded. I do know there is going to be strong advocacy this session and during the budgeting process to fund it appropriately. I think the estimate last year was 75 million. I think was going to be the general request. As a board member of the Virginia Housing Alliance, we're going to be going in for a much larger request to meet the need, which is probably closer to 10 times what that 75 million would otherwise fund. So there's going to be push on that front, just to kind of make sure you're aware. And then the other piece, somewhat relatedly, and this gets at the units piece that Anthony spoke of, the front and center issue that every affordable housing organization is contending with anywhere, but certainly in the Commonwealth, is access to funding to address costs and increased costs in construction and development. The two biggest sources at the state level are, in recent years, are the State Housing Trust Fund, which you probably know last year saw a significant increase to 150 million in the biennium, but we had asked for 300. So it was not funded at the level that we think we collectively need. We know, not think, we know we collectively need. So just as a push to kind of reinforce that that's going to come again as a request from Virginia Housing Alliance and others, as you likely know. And then the last piece is funding that has only been in play for the last couple of years, but has been frankly transformative as a source, is the funding that comes from RGGI. That funding initially was estimated to, it was a split roughly 50-50 between sort of wetland protection and coastal protection, and then the other half going with energy efficiency and affordable housing. When it was originally passed and we joined RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, I think the estimate was going to be something like 25 million a year, roughly speaking, coming into the affordable housing portion. In reality, what has happened over the last 2 years is that number has been closer to 150 million. Much larger than was basically every quarter it goes in for an auction, and the auction proceeds have far outstripped projections on a regular basis, which is fantastic, and it's an enormous pot of money. Frankly, it dwarfs the State Housing Trust Fund dollars. But our governor chose to put a lock on it with a long-term goal to withdraw Virginia from RGGI. That source of funding has been a lifeline over the during COVID to cover construction cost increases, Friendship Courts, other Southwood project. That literally have been a lifeline. Those projects would not have happened or started or come close to starting without that funding in play. As we look into the coming year, we need access to those dollars. And they provide a secondary benefit, which is mandating that the housing that does get built for constituents is deeply energy efficient, which helps those households in the long run with reduced energy costs and energy consumption. So I just wanted to reinforce that keeping Virginia in RGGI and keeping those dollars flowing, in addition to growing the Housing Trust Fund dollars, are critical if we're going to actually see success on developing affordable housing locally.
You're here. The only thing I would add is that I think this is another opportunity for some really important accountability messaging with this administration, because I think that particularly on long neglected investments, whether it's school construction or what we know to be a deficit of many hundreds of thousands of units across the Commonwealth in housing, there's a temptation among people in Richmond to measure things by historic standards and say, by historic standards, this is a massive investment for Virginia in what is a ginormous hole. I mean, I remember, the Northam administration made a historic investment in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund when they put $10 million in it during the first term. And I remember going to VHA and saying, how big should that number be? And they were like, I was like, okay. So actually drop in the bucket. I mean, they did the same thing on school construction this year, where the statewide task force said the hole is $25 billion. We got $1 billion, and we had to do the important messaging, especially in the press, which is to say, tiny drop in the bucket on a very big, long neglected problem. I think in particular on RGGI, not only do we have a lot of work to do, and gosh, I hope you might consider testifying in Richmond to tell exactly that story, is that the governor has seized on the message that RGGI is a hidden tax on energy customers, that it's being passed down to customers in the form of a rider on their electric bills, which is particularly salient to the customers. It shows up in a line item. There is something that we can do about that without leaving RGGI, and that's RAC reform. And that's something that I've been an active advocate for the last 3 years and gonna keep at. And I think we've actually got now some good bipartisanship on that, at least in the House and God willing in the Senate. And so I think it's important for us to diffuse what is, I think, a misleading talking point by putting up a proactive, positive solution, which is actually there are things that we can do to eliminate what you perceive to be the downside of RGGI without undermining its tremendous benefits.
Would you expand a little bit on that?
Oh, sure. So,
Sorry.
let me see if I can do the quick crash course on RAC reform. The big picture, your energy bill comes in two parts. There's the base rate that you're charged as a function of the kilowatts that you use. And there's RACs, or riders, rate adjustment clauses, which are tied to specific projects, like Reggie, like a pipeline, like a specific power plant. And over the last many years now, 15 anyway, the utilities have increasingly tried to recover their costs through these riders, through the RACs, rather than through the base rate. Why do they do that? It's because it lets them double up on the costs that they collect from consumers. Big picture, Dominion and APCO don't really make most of their money delivering electrons to your door. They make money because they have a statutory requirement to recover their cost for capital construction. So the investor-owned utilities want to build stuff and they want to bill you for it. And they have cooked the books in their favor. I don't know, there's no other honest way to say it. By making it very, very difficult for the State Corporation Commission to lower the base rate. Like, there's pretty explicit language that ties the hands of the State Corporation Commission from lowering the base rate. Like, you read it firsthand and it basically says, heads I win, tails you lose. Either way, can you lower the base rate? And so they achieved that legislative victory with an army of lobbyists. I mean, they play man defense on the Senate. There are 40 registered lobbyists each session. It's wild. And then they achieved protecting the base rate, and then they added all the RACs on top, which is basically a way of it, which has driven, as you see from what I think are the good parts of the governor's energy plan, some very honest accounting of just how much RACs have driven the increase in energy bills in Virginia over the last 10 or 15 years. What RAC reform means is preventing the utilities from continuing to tack onto bills these project-specific costs, and instead empowering the State Corporation Commission to reassess the base rate and say, every time you come up for what we call a rate case, which is every 3 years, the State Corporation Commission needs to honestly assess the cost of recovery for the capital projects that you currently have on the books, and then adjust the base rate accordingly so that you can't double up in this way with base rates and RACs. Virginia hasn't had a clean rate case where the State Corporation Commission has had the authority to do that since I was 3 years old. So this problem is almost as old as I am. And it's why I've taken 2 or 3 different swings at this problem with different bills, all of them bipartisan. I don't know if you all know Delegate Ware from Louisa, who serves in Louisa. He's a Republican and also a consumer protection champion. He and I have come at this a handful of different ways each year that I've been in office. He is going to come back, I think, and carry another tack this time around. And I'm optimistic now that the governor has given really full-throated support to RAC reform that we might stand a shot at it. We have consistently gotten these bills out of the House for the last 2 years. They have consistently died in the Senate at the hands of Democrats and Republicans alike. So this is a bipartisan affliction.
That was very helpful, thank you. And that does lead to just a quick follow-up, if I may add. To help me with where we stand right now with the State Corporation Commission.
Yes.
That, you mentioned it, and that has been what's going on there is very concerning.
Yeah, we now have 2 open seats on the State Corporation Commission. Is that right? Because there's a lot of things moving very quickly. Yes, thank you for jogging my memory. Yeah, the General Assembly went back to Richmond in August. Sorry, post-COVID, my capacity to remember the time has gotten very fuzzy. Back in August, and we failed to do the one and only thing that we were supposed to do, which was to appoint a judge to fill the open vacancy on the State Corporation Commission. And candidly, I was frustrated because I heard some pretty good names floated from the Republicans in the House. And again, I think there are Democrats in the Senate who are less excited about putting watchdogs on the State Corporation Commission. Now with the resignation of the second of 3 commissioners, we've got 2 open seats. This is something, these people have, though they're pretty weedsy and relatively unknown, have a really outsized impact on a lot of pocketbook issues for consumers. I mean, these are the same people who like ultimately are watching out for the health insurance premium that, you know, jacked this region through the roof 5 years ago. So I think that hopefully we'll get both of those seats filled in the upcoming session, but right now 2 out of 3 are vacant.
And it's very concerning when they're not able to function.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the good news is that the SEC is a very large administrative agency, so the judges, the commissioners steer the agenda and they ultimately pass the verdicts, but the agency has a lot of good civil servants that continue to do their good work.
Yeah, I've just been reading in the Richmond Times, there's some concern about what's going on down there and getting those appointees in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
Very good. Other questions? So I have a general one. Often when we get together, whether it's the executive committee, the full partnership, a lot of us were at the Virginia Governor's Housing Conference. The difficulty where you have affordable housing issues in the urban areas, then you also have affordable housing issues in the rural areas, and the solutions or the services or the needs aren't necessarily the same, even though they fall under the same umbrella. Just how do you go about, as a state legislator, trying to prioritize both? And any thoughts on that conundrum that we often wrestle with? Okay, and like specific in Albemarle, we have a very urbanized area, we have a very rural area, so we have to deal with both issues. Any thoughts on how you go about dealing with
And then tangentially, that gets to what one of my earlier concerns was, right? In treating all areas exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the General Assembly should try to raise the floor and the ceiling. That we should, you know, try to set some minimum standards to make sure that, you know, localities are making it over the bar, but mostly get out of your way so that you have flexibility to tailor solutions to local challenges. I think that, like, for that reason, I think I try to err very highly on the side of permissive local options in tackling these things so that we can empower local governments to do that. Frankly, you know, because I'm the only urban legislator for miles around here, find myself spending the lion's share of my time talking with the rural parts of this. I mean, I spent last week sitting down with one of the Nelson supervisors to talk about what their experience has been, particularly as properties for them are getting gobbled up by IT workers who are coming in, you know, with loads of cash to offer up properties, and their rents are skyrocketing. You know, and they're not bringing with the kids to enroll in the local public schools, and you know, it's dramatically changing the character of that community. The ADU bill that I talked about is a collaboration with folks from Wise. So
And that's what I was getting at, rural versus urban, would be very different issues.
yeah, I mean,
Not to be treated all the same.
yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that that's true both in terms of local authority and then also in particular on the tax side. I mean, I think that you're very constrained given how much taxation is supposed to be very uniform across localities and stuck in a lot of ways, particularly on the property tax side in the Constitution. So it's a heavy lift to create more tools there.
Supervisor Reed, I think of, you're here from Nelson County today. Any thoughts or questions on that?
I think you just spoke for Jesse.
Yeah.
So that's good. The same things are on my mind, you know, in terms of, you know, I mean, I'm not as familiar with housing things, especially at the state level, as some other people are, so I'm still going to school.
Yeah, aren't we all?
Yeah.
Well, speaking of one of the, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. It's okay, I wanted to follow up with
Good to see your hand.
You know, in our work, well, this is true across all sectors, but certainly in homeless services, but housing as healthcare is, you know, we just don't want to keep hitting home. And related to that is, you know, part of that healthcare is mental health supports and adequately funding state mental health support. I know you've worked a lot with Anna Mendez on this. She's in a new role with the Haven as well. And I would be remiss if I didn't have the opportunity to say how those two things are often linked, especially in home services. And, you know, there's been a lot of successful funding for us locally with Region 10 CSB, with funding from Department of Behavioral Health and Human Services. That's, you know, for users of the CSB. So anyways, I just wanted to speak in support of that housing portion in particular, but just for adequately funding our mental health system. It's just such a crucial piece of the puzzle, which I know is somewhat tangentially related, but really is just intimately related to housing stability for our community.
I'm so glad you said that because I forgot one of the other housing measures that I'm going to be carrying this session because it's a budget line item as opposed to a bill. I'm working with DMAS on a budget amendment to fund a pilot program for Medicaid coverage of housing, so that we could recognize that housing is healthcare for people. So it would be one of Virginia's, you know, moving down that road, not the, you know, whole shebang, but we're gonna try it this year and see how it goes. I'm super excited about that project and optimistic, because it's December and people haven't crushed my dreams yet, that we might get through, because hopefully there's a lot of bipartisan support for that. And then the other piece that you hit on is, you know, in terms of accountability messaging, the reality is that the recent shooting tragedies in both Charlottesville and Chesapeake have put the governor on the spot for mental health funding, because if your knee-jerk response to every act of gun violence is that we need to do more about mental health, then you've got to fund it. And so my hope is that we can, you know, people say don't politicize shootings, but they happen too often in this country for there not to be a window to do it anymore. So my hope is that in this session that we can get this administration to put their money where their mouth is on that, and if it takes a catalyzing event, then we would be remiss not to.
Thank you for that update. That's exciting. You know, I was really encouraged years ago when that legislation, I think, there was the ability, or it was coming down the pike to be able to use Medicaid for housing supports, and then something happened. But so it's potentially back. Is that what you're saying, or you're putting forward a bill to put it?
We're putting forward a proposal, a concrete proposal for how much you could fund it and how exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So is that going to result in actually an increase in the reimbursement rates?
I think it's not a rate so much as a coverage.
Because what I'm hearing from the mental health providers is nobody will offer mental health services through Medicaid because they can't get paid.
So
They can't
I'm
get
sorry.
paid an adequate amount.
Sorry, I thought you were asking about the housing piece. Yes, absolutely. When we talk about funding mental health, in what we really need is raising reimbursement rates. It's the same thing, for example, like last year, one of the big improvements in Medicaid funding was we raised the reimbursement rates for dental care. Because the year before we had legalized dental coverage through Medicaid, but all the dentists came back and said, I can't do it at that rate. Right. So practically speaking, on the mental health side, it's about raising reimbursement rates.
I mean, for Region 10, they just basically had to go out of business. They closed down the wellness center or whatever the building was. I remember what the building is, I'm not sure what they were calling it, because they couldn't afford it. They just couldn't hire people who could work at a rate that could work there.
Especially in communities like this.
I do want to highlight, though, what Sally was saying, though, which is a little bit different what you're bringing up, which is there are states across the country who have spearheaded the idea of using some housing-related costs.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's really cool.
Yeah.
So when you're talking mental health, let's not lose sight.
Yeah, agreed.
So our partnership is made up of, you've got honest elected folks here, you've got service providers here, you've got folks from the nonprofit world and the for-profit world. So I asked this in kind of a way of something that I've been struggling with. We received a report a few months ago at our board that we had a consultant, basically an economic outlook report for the county. And one of the things that stood out to me in that is that wages in the Charlottesville-Albemarle area, this is true of Stanton and Augusta as well, we're always above the average, the state average and the national average. And that flipped in around the 2010, 2012 range, where we were then below the state and national level. Now, while we've continued to grow since then, we're still kind of down below that. I need someone like you to explain that to me historically, that's not a question now. But I can't let that go, trying to understand when we then start saying, well, we live in an incredibly wealthy area, property values continue to rise. We learned a month or so ago at a presentation of the TJPDC, which everybody knows, that if you're even earning $20, $22 an hour, you're struggling to find affordable rent in the area. So, obviously what folks earn wage-wise has a big impact on what you can afford to pay in the housing space. But this is kind of your area of expertise. Can you speak or offer any thoughts on, I guess, what's the word, health of wages, and how we help that in that area, or what could be or may be done, just in general response to it?
So I'm going to give you two general answers, and then I would love to read exactly what you were reading to understand to what extent these might be drivers, because I'm going to be an economist for a moment and say there are many things going on, and the question is really to what extent each of these explanations is driving it. But I would not be surprised to learn that Charlottesville has been a hotbed for what labor economists call the great polarization of wages. There's the hollowing out of the middle class and the rise in job growth among low-wage service sector jobs and high-wage professional jobs. And what you see in practice is if you sort of get into a tale of two cities, then you get exactly the phenomenon that you're describing at the average or the median. And as this community, I think, in particular, starts get some more of the folks that you're talking about, that ability to have more people who have additional military, you can see that kind of stuff that becomes pervasive. So what do we do about that? There are sort of two things. One of them is that in the face of that pressure, particularly in an era where the political makeup of Virginia was such that we did not have strong collective bargaining options, either in the private sector or the public sector, and a lot of really weak labor laws on the books around, everything, benefits, wage theft, all of that. There were not the mechanisms by which workers could organize to exert pressure against that underlying force. So I do think that unionization and collective bargaining is part of it, particularly because public sector jobs have always been an engine of wages for the middle class. And then the other piece, and this is where I would love to learn more about what you're describing in particular, is sort of depend on the footprint of whatever sort of numbers that you were looking at, because I think we all know that the character of the workforce that serves this building stretches as far down as people getting on a bus in Buckingham, every day. And so we've sort of got these concentric circle waves out of people who are part of our broader area workforce, and what's happening inside each of those layers is a little bit different.
You're describing that with the hollowing out of the middle class, exactly what I'm saying.
And we have every locality in the TJPDC is doing a compensation study.
Right, which tells you, everybody is.
And frankly, no offense to those in the private sector, they are for public sector employees to keep your folks when they're being offered $20,000, $30,000 more to make the move over. That's part of the reason we're doing the compensation study, to see where going to be, I guess. But that, that's a difficult thing to keep your talent in your area when you're seeing that just below.
Yeah, we're losing lots of employees to the private sector. And you can't blame them because they're getting better jobs as far as higher pay, better benefits, the whole gamut, and it's just very concerning.
And not Supervisor Galloway and McKeel to do it. Sorry. Other questions or comments?
I have a question, and I'm sorry to be so mouthy today, but, and this is a little, this is not new, a little tangential, but when you talk about flexibility for localities and giving us the ability, maybe not so much for affordable housing, but all of the work we do around infill, and I'll give you the example that I'm talking about, Sally. Right now, in my urban district, we are building an office building, and that's fine. That was approved in 2004. Now, that approval happened when if it came back to us now in the same form that it's being built, we would be requiring lots of other, perhaps something very different. I mean, what was approved in '04 might not be appropriate to go in where it's going right now, or maybe not look, maybe it's the egresses need to be different, you know, I'm just saying that there's no sunset clause. Once these proposals are approved, there's no sunset clause on how quickly they have to be built. And we've talked about this at the board level multiple times in that, well, I don't, you know, the state keeps extending, the General Assembly keeps extending the amount of time every 5 years that these proposals can stay the same and be built. You get where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
To try and figure out, there's gotta be, if something is approved in '04 and it's not built in 15 years, 10 years, I don't know, maybe 20. It seems like to me that it would be reasonable for the locality to have the ability to come back and at least say, wait a minute, this is not even the same area. It doesn't even look the same, it doesn't function the same as it did when it was approved.
I would love to sit down with the county attorney and learn at a brass tacks level, where does that happen in the law?
Okay.
Because it's not something that I've looked at closely.
I don't know if anybody else is struggling with that or not, but literally, we have one right now that was approved in '04.
Yeah.
That whole area is completely changed. And I'm not saying that I have anything against this particular type of thing. It's just that we were talking about needing affordable housing or infill or doing other things with properties. We need the flexibility to be able to review some of these projects.
Can I ask you all a related question? Because I hear, and I'm sure that you do as well, in your conversations with developers about bottlenecks at the local level in the permitting and approval process. They say that, like, you know, you start this process and then you can't, you know, actually start putting shovels in the ground until fast enough. I don't feel like I've gotten a clear answer to the question about, like, where in the pipes of government are the slowdowns and what can be done to speed them up? Like, is this there's just not enough money for enough personnel in local government to process the permits? Like, where is the holdup and where are the opportunities for expediting?
So it's a complex, I would say it's a complex response if you're speaking, because this sounds like one that Alvaro may have been pointed out. Yeah, this could be an example. But you've got, how I would answer that is you have a systems issue. So you have antiquated systems in use. We've got a personnel drain, just spoke to trying to retain the people, but we also have mid-budget year last year, we approved 17 positions. In the next budget cycle, we approved another 18 to 24 on top of that, and they're not being filled quickly, so you have a personnel issue. And then, I mean, I would be lying if you didn't say, you know, you've got different people probably do a different level of scrutiny when they have those applications in front of them. So that's probably best a philosophical or a policy issue that the board would ultimately have to figure that out, working with their county executive. So I think it's a three-pronged approach of, is the system, the mechanism they use to process the permits or whatever it is, as efficient as it can be? Do you have the people in place to be able to do it? And then do you have the right mentality being done on the work that's actually being done? It's not been at this point a money issue because we've budgeted, so we've approved positions. But we are in, like, we just put in our software, et cetera, in the county. I don't know if it's different in the city.
And I will just add to what Ned's saying, historically, I mean, Albemarle County, I'll just say, our software package and our programs were animal, right? Because it's very difficult. It's one of those things where, for government, it's difficult to, I'm sorry, just let me finish a second. It's very difficult to take to the community that you need to, I don't know, say that they're a ward, that you need more revenues to, need to raise taxes to put in new software packaging, IT problem, you know, all of those issues. So it is a money issue, it's a salary issue, but it gets to software and people. We've lost a lot of people. We were just talking about it in our community development right now. I refer to it as aces and spaces. And we don't have enough people to be doing the work right now. But Ned's right, it's multifaceted. It's just not one reason.
There's different bits and pieces of what you said, that maybe the software investments have recently been made, or do you still consider that a bottleneck?
Well, they have been made, but we just had to address it, but they should have been made.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know, make it up, a decade ago. It's just.
It's no different than a payroll switch, that you
Yeah.
invest it, and then
That's
you put
right.
it in, and then you've got to get it in, you got
Right.
to implement it, so we're in that implementation stage.
It also can be, I don't know any way to say it, but it doesn't sound petty. It could be a personality thing. We've got a problem in the city of Charlottesville right now, without getting into a lot of detail, where you've got some folks on the private side who are just pissed off at the folks on the city side and vice versa, and they can't see eye to eye as to what an acceptable application looks like. And the city manager is trying to mediate this dispute between them, but we've got delays of a year or more on just things like engineering details that ought to be resolvable. And it's so frustrating for those of us who we get harped at on both sides, and basically what we need is for these two people to start, or two groups of people, start acting like they're adults. And I don't know any better way to say it than that. My fear is if somebody comes along and says, okay, you, by state law, 60 days and you've got to be out with this project, that assumes, first of all, that the engineering people who are submitting the application have actually done a good faith effort to get the whole stupid thing finished, instead of putting a 20% effort in and figure out we'll clean it up as we go along. And that's the kind of thing that we've had problems with, where they put in sort of almost a placeholder. I mean, we keep talking about how we're going to approve a special use permit, which is required by law to have a site plan with it.
Yeah.
But that we're going to approve the special use permit conditioned upon submitting a site plan.
Yeah.
You can't do it that way, but that's the way everybody does it. And it's frustrating, and I don't think it gets solved by an answer from Richmond.
Okay, well, that's great to hear. Just wanted to give the compliment.
And
Yes, sir.
I'm the low volume custom home builder who has also sampled in infill construction that is already approved by right, as well as infill development that requires minor subdivision approval. I work in both Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville, and I've experienced the private sector side of what these fine people have shared. And I sit at this table because I'm passionate about it. I volunteer for the Blue Ridge Home Builders Association because I'm passionate about it. And we've been very grateful to the community development director at Albemarle County for calling several roundtables engaging the Blue Ridge Home Builders Association volunteer capacity to roundtable and try to problem solve some of that building permit throughput issues. Now, that does not address entitlements, but at least once we're at that process, we're grateful for the opportunity to collaborate. At some level, I need enough time for my business and attention, but I love the conversations that are being had today and hope that I can continue to be a part of the solution, because I hope to do it for some more decades to come.
Well, we're struggling too with how to help, right? I mean, it is a concern.
And it's so great to hear you say that, and also it's what makes me extra nervous about what's happening in Urbana and Buckingham, and because, you know, all things considered, Albemarle County is one of the best run, best localities, and so I think about trying to replicate the level of expertise and personnel and infrastructure to do all of this across 133 localities. It starts to get pretty daunting.
And I want to just say that this little blue note that I was receiving, this is very helpful. Obviously, other people in the room agree with me. This is the extension of the expiration of the SUP, so you can take that.
Thank you.
to heart.
Oh, and with a code citation.
I didn't know the code.
Merry
citation,
Christmas
but
to
Matt
me.
managed to get it for me, so that's good.
So we're closing in on the last 10, 15 minutes or so. Are there any other questions around the room or online? I've got two we'll kind of float in, because one, they was specific, that staff cited was, can you talk about the rationale behind HB 1286, the Housing Authorities Laws? Some general like background, statement of purpose, anything like that?
Quiz yourself.
Did I file that? Did someone
Yes,
else?
that's what it said. It said you sponsored it, so I'm not sure. I guess you didn't file it necessarily, but.
In which year? They all get new numbers every year.
Last year.
Last year,
This-
HB 1286.
Yeah.
This sounds like a former student trying to.
Just like, yeah.
Yeah, can I phone a friend, like me in an hour? If I try to Peter, I would love to.
Yeah.
The housing authorities law, last year, HB.
It had to do with demolition and renovation.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, that one, sorry, yeah, I couldn't tell you about that. Last year I carried a bill which, wasn't a technical easy bill, but it was geared toward, facilitating, faster redevelopment of public housing projects. Because there used to be an old system of notification, where, I know I'm getting the details on the fly, but in order to let residents know that their units were about to be renovated, there was two separate stages which could have proceeded in parallel, and therefore allowed residents to still get the same amount of timely notification that they were gonna need to relocate temporarily, while allowing the construction efforts to get moving. And so this was a project that was done in collaboration with Virginia First Cities and a bunch of the other regional housing authorities to try to make it smoother to facilitate public housing reservation like the one we see right now.
Right, okay. That's what I, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. At first somebody came to me and was like, you're carrying a bill that says you can bulldoze public housing faster? And I was like, no, without a quick notice.
Right.
Because people want to move into nicer units sooner, right? Yeah. Yeah. It did raise some eyebrows initially, yeah.
So as a way to perhaps wrap up, and maybe this could lead into if you'd like to make any closing remarks, President. We obviously, in each of the sectors we represent, hear what our constituents or those we service are saying to us about affordable housing in the area. So I'd just be curious, what do you hear day in and day out from folks that you represent around the topic of affordable housing?
What don't we hear? Everyone's got an opinion, and of course, we know that this is an incredibly diverse community, especially when it comes to economic needs. And so you get a lot of different perspectives, and I think it probably comes back to the idea that I'm sure all of us hear all the time, which is what affordable means varies wildly from different people, and from the range of public housing and limited supportive housing up through partially supported projects and people who may have a partial voucher, to people who are looking for starter homes or entry level market housing on up from there. And so I think it's surround sound for sure.
Well, I would certainly offer that, but one of the nice things about the Regional Housing Partnership is we have all these different venues to come and talk to one another about things. So if you would ever like to call on us to take advantage of what we do, the executive committee meets monthly, the Regional Housing Partnership at large meets quarterly. So by all means, and if we can be there to be a resource to you and the work you do, please do not hesitate to call us.
I'm very mindful of the pieces that both of you mentioned, which is at the end of the day, all the economic policy here is in service of nuts and bolts engineering. For this particular body of work, I feel fortunate that I studied economics at engineering schools, where this is specifically, they were teaching us economics because they wanted us to help figure out how do you finance and facilitate very concrete projects, literal concrete projects. And so there's there can be philosophy and ideology in this, but if you're not talking to the people who are swinging the hammers and nails, or hiring the people that are swinging the hammers and nails, then you're not actually trying to solve the problem. So I appreciate the diversity of voices that's in this group, but especially it's rooted in that essential problem and perspective.
Any closing thoughts or comments or remarks? Or?
Just that, I so appreciate your work, and I think you all know that housing is at the source point of every other challenge that lands on our desks in this community and every community, but it's healthcare, it's workforce, it's nothing else moves until people have a safe place to lay their head at night, so.
Well, on behalf of the whole partnership, we really appreciate you taking the time today to answer questions and be here to discuss with us. So, a round of applause. If we could and quiet applause online. You see the hands moving together. We have a couple of just quick presentation items. If we could maybe move through that, if you've got time to.
Yeah.
Here, I think folks might like to make some one-on-one connections.
Absolutely.
And we'll try to move through that expeditiously as you.
Yeah, so I mean, these are less presentation items than just kind of quick updates on some of the housing programming here at the PDC, but I know that we've been talking a lot, I can see you, man. We've been talking a lot in these meetings about the strategic planning process and our implementation of it, and I just wanted to give everyone the heads up that we have officially submitted an application for an AmeriCorps Vista member to the Virginia Housing Alliance. I know that some of the organizations in here had really positive experiences with Vista members, and even have hired them on after their service period is done, but that person, if we are awarded one or allowed to get one through VHA, would be the primary point person on a lot of the materials that we talked about in our implementation committee. So it would change our implementation schedule, it would push it back and start real both of that in August of 2023 when the Vista member would start. But that would be a really great piece of extra capacity for not only the partnership, but for the TJPDC. And so we're going to hopefully hear about that by the end of the month from VHA. But I just wanted to let everyone know that we officially submitted that application. And then just some other, and I'll let, Laura Jean, I'd like to introduce Laura Jean Saloon, who's our new Regional Housing Grants Manager. So she is going to be the primary point person for home, HPG, right? Those are the two. And Homework. So really happy to have her on board, and she would be happy to talk to you guys after, I'm sure. But just on the Virginia Housing Development Grant, we're officially up to 10 completed units across the region. If I have it correct, I believe it's 4 in Charlotte.
4 in Louisa.
4 in Louisa, 4 in Charlottesville, and 2 in Fluvanna, 1 in Fluvanna. I think it might be 5, 4, 1. Some split of that. I would be happy to follow up. But that's actually half of our goal, our mandated goal that Virginia Housing has dictated. We build 20 units or contribute to the building of 20 units. And our major, much more big projects through CRHA and Virginia Support Housing actually haven't started construction for the units that we funded. So that number will increase by a lot. Yes.
What source of funds is that? That home or?
No, so it's a pilot program for Virginia Housing. It's at $2 million. They gave $1 million, $2 million, and $3 million to planning districts depending on their population size, and then it increases by 10 per $1 million you get the amount of units you have to construct. So we ordered these funds, I believe, in April.
Okay. Was it homeless related or something?
No, so it was just affordable housing gap funding. Yeah, so it was $500,000, but
it was 40 million that Virginia Housing across the Commonwealth, and they went through the 21 planning district commissions in order to get that funding up Commonwealth-wide. So they didn't really want to do it as a competitive application because they felt that some localities that didn't necessarily have the bandwidth wouldn't receive the funding that they needed. And so, like you said, they're 1, 2, or 3, and we were eligible for up to 2. And I think we have something like over 150 units that we're going to give gap funding to, but the requirement was 20 or more.
Yeah, and it's it should be every locality will receive their units being constructed in all of them, which is that was a priority of ours to make sure that we're representing the 6 localities in that. And the last thing I'll say and I might kick it over to Christine or Jean about Homemark and other federal programs, but the Virginia the Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot Grant, our implementation grant ends at the end of this month. And so right now, we're actually working really hard to spend down the remaining money, and by we, I mean the folks over at PHA, who are the actual implementers of the grant. So I really recommend, if you know anyone who needs rental assistance, please forward their information or get them in touch with Dave Norris or someone at the Financial Opportunity Center or Housing Hub, and Housing Hub. That money is use it or lose it. We're really looking to spend as much down as we can. And we're still waiting to hear back from DHC about whether or not we've received for 3.0 funding, which is a 1 year plus additional year where we don't have to reapply, but basically we'd be having this program exist in our community for at least 2 more years through this funding source at least. So we're really trying hard to spend as much of that as we can. Yes.
Sorry, I was blanking out when you said what money can be used for.
Oh, from the
That we're trying to use, yeah.
So a lot of different things. It's primarily, so the 2 types of direct assistance are like stabilization services. So like you can pay for someone's transportation, childcare, moving expenses, rent arrears.
Well,
Can it potentially cover folks who found out that they did not get in before the deadline, before DHCD ended the last round?
Yes. And so there's a little bit more to this than there's an intake process, and so there are a variety of characteristics that you have to have. I think it's like 3 of 8, but it's primarily, a certain AMI, single parent, working, or primarily, like there's a variety of intake criteria that DHCD is sort of attached to it, but I want to say that it's low barrier. There's a lot of different types of people that can be helped by this funding, so I'd be happy to get you the information after this.
And when we originally applied for the VERT funding, it was before the moratorium, it was
Yes.
before that terminated. And so the program has kind of had to morph over time to be able to cover rent, when previously it was only all other things tangential except for the rent itself. So that has changed now, and it is an eligible expense.
Yeah, that's
great.
Yeah, that's exactly it, where when we designed and implemented this program initially, it was almost exclusively funding that was going to be dedicated to other auxiliary costs that folks have that isn't rent. Now that a lot of rental assistance doesn't exist anymore, DHCD has allowed us to reallocate a bunch of our funding to rent arrears.
That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
well, also, if I can be helpful, the, city/county pathways, and general community assistance line, I think would be a great way to get some of that money out there to people who need it.
Definitely.
I know the gap we're seeing is that some of our federal funding for prevention in particular isn't meeting a need for people who have had a drop of their income,
right,
and have arrears. Now they can still afford rent going forward, but they still have this arrears. But we can't help them because they're making too much money. I don't know if those same might apply there, but anyways.
We should try to fit as many people.
I think with the pathways assistance line, that would be a great potential connection.
And I know Dave and his team have been working really hard. Like they're really connected to the LAJC with a lot of folks that are eviction dockets there. So hopefully, But we should hopefully. I mean, I'm really hoping that we receive more money from the HCD as well. So, and then again, I guess Homemark. We're in the process of putting together our allocation plan for HUD. It's involved a variety of. Depending on the locality, what they wanted to do, meeting with locality staff, getting it before the governing board or not, depending on what county administration is. But I think we're still on schedule to have that before the commission at our February commission. Public hearing on February, but
It's required to be submitted to HUD by March.
Yeah.
It has to be February.
But a variety of different potential uses. It's very specific about the types of people, the qualifying populations or what they're called, but the range of activities is actually pretty broad. So hoping that will be, as soon as we can get it to localities, that's what we'll do. And then for home and HPG, I don't know if Regina or Christina want to talk about that.
No, they're just ongoing. I would say for housing preservation grant, we typically receive anywhere from $100,000 to $160,000 a year. This year we were awarded $215,000, and it's a 1-year grant, and it's first come, first served for all 6 jurisdictions, except for Charlottesville, because it is rural funding. And then the home program, same thing. We're continuing to administer several different grant years simultaneously, the same way we always have, but no real updates on homes.
And that's the staff update.
Very good. Thank you, Ian. Very good. Well done. Quickly, good. We did not achieve a quorum, were you keeping the number? We did not get to our number. All right. So we will just have to note with the minutes of the other item. We'll move over to the next quarterly meeting, which will be March 22nd, which is the same week as our coming home, which is March 24th, the Friday, beyond.
We probably will move it to the actual event.
Let's hope so.
Yes.
We'll do like we did last time, at the very last
Hopefully
hour of the day before
Yeah.
the meeting starts.
That's what we're going to do.
So it'd be the 24th.
Right, because that's the day of the all-day conference. that we're
Yes.
having. And the only update I'll provide, two updates. The executive committee did do a bylaws review as part of our strategic plan work. So we're in the process of writing up some of the recommended changes, and that will be coming. If it's not in March, then it will come to the full partnership by June's meeting. We want to try to have it approved by the next fiscal year.
About changing the quorum requirement?
No, but it's looking, specifically, the executive committee looked at terms for officers. The electronic meeting participation needs to be cleaned up to be in line with the DJPDC. The work on membership, who's involved at either the partnership or the executive committee, is going to be part of some consultant work that we're going to have to build on the strategic plan information we receive. So who sits at the table, how they can be involved, numbers, quorum numbers, all of that is going to be done outside of the executive committee in this instance.
Assuming we get a grant, we're gonna apply to Virginia Housing for a tier 2 implementation grant for funding to do that work.
Which will come, feel good that we'll The other update is that myself and Keith Smith, our vice chair, we're what Keith likes to call the Keith and Ed Road Show, is kicking off next week in Greene County. So we're going to the Greene County Board of Supervisors. We have some time. It's a hello from the Regional Housing Partnership. Here's what we do. Here's how we're a resource to you. So that will begin. I believe Flavanna will be in January, and then we'll be coming to other elected bodies at a time to be announced. So we're going to hit everybody in the TJPDC region, so all the buttons that are there. So with that, since we don't have a quorum, I can just call the adjournment. And again, thank you to Delegate Hudson, and please, by all means, say hello and interact a little bit, provided you have a little bit. But we're good. Good to see everybody here. Good to see everybody online. And we hope everybody enjoys the holidays and has a happy New Year. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.